joining us this evening. I'm so glad you're all able to be here. We will be sharing this recording later. I know many people were unable to join us tonight, so we will make this recording available. I am Amara Andrews, and I am very excited to be running to be the next mayor of Cedar Rapids. One of the pillars of my campaign is about community. People matter. This topic, mental health, also intersects with the other two pillars of my campaign, which are recovery and economy. To have a thriving community, we need to take care of all of our citizens. And as we know, people who suffer from mental illness have been hit hard by the COVID pandemic and the lifestyle changes that have been required, as well as by the derecho we had here in Cedar Rapids. In Iowa, 1 in 5 people will have some kind of mental illness in a given year. Since the pandemic, there has been a noticeable uptick in mental illnesses. Newer information suggests 1 out of 4 will experience a mental condition in a given year. At the beginning of this year, about 4 in 10 adults in the United States reported symptoms of anxiety or depression, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. As we all know, mental illness does not discriminate. It can affect anyone, regardless of your age, gender, geography, income, social status, race, ethnicity, religion, spirituality, sexual orientation, background, or other aspect of cultural identity. Most of us have people in our family who suffer from mental illness, and I am no exception to that. Of particular interest to me is how we handle children with mental health concerns. I've talked to many mothers in our community who don't know how to deal with their own children's issues and end up calling the police. In one instance, a mom I talked to with a son with severe mental illness was imprisoned. It's imperative that we have the resources in our community, particularly for individuals who do not have health care, but that is not enough. People need to know what resources are available, and they need to be accessible for all. So the goal tonight is to learn from our local experts and community leaders about the challenges in Cedar Rapids, the resources we have to help support those facing mental illnesses, and ways we can help end the stigma. All of our panelists are here as local experts and leaders in their fields. Their participation is not an participation is not an endorsement of my campaign, and I am grateful for each and every one of you for offering your time and expertise to this discussion and this very important topic. Thank you so much for being here. We're sharing on the screen, as you can see, local, state, and national resources anyone can access for mental health services. I acknowledge that events such as this one, where we discuss individual as well as community experiences, can be triggering to some people. So please know that you are not alone. Do not hesitate to reach out for help or encourage someone you know to do so. If you need a moment, please take the time to jot down these numbers, or we will also post them on our site, on our social, which is Amara4CR. On all social handles, we will post this. All right, now I will transition to our panelists. First, we have my very good friend, Ann Harris Carter. Ann has more than 25 years of experience in corporate leadership in retail, banking, and energy sectors. Ann returned to Cedar Rapids, her hometown, in 2012. She is a graduate of Yale and is dedicated to community service. She is currently a board member for Advocates for Social Justice, Orchestra Iowa, and Unity Point Health, St. Luke's. Ann plays the violin and is exceedingly grateful for her 3 adult children and granddaughter. And I am so grateful to have Ann in my life. Thank you, Ann, for being here tonight. Next, we have Drew Martell, who is Director of Crisis Services at Foundation 2 in Cedar Rapids. Drew has been involved in the development and expansion of several mental health initiatives in Iowa, including one of the first mobile crisis programs in the state. In addition to his work at Foundation 2, he provides therapy at Meadowlark Psychiatric Services in North Liberty. Drew is a military veteran and lives in Cedar Rapids with his wife, Anna, and 2 daughters, Madeline and River. Thank you so much, Drew, for being here. We have Ben Rogers. Ben was first elected to the Lynn County Board of Supervisors in 2008 at the age of 28. You can do some math there to figure out how old Ben is now. He has led the effort to create the Mental Health Access Center and serves on the board of directors for multiple nonprofits. In 2017, Ben was appointed by the governor to the Iowa Council of Homelessness and was named one of Lynn County's National Alliance, was named one of Lynn County's National Alliance on Mental Health, mental illnesses, Heroes in the Fight, for his work on issues related to mental health. Ben is married to his wife, Andrea, and his 2 children, Kieran and Penelope. Thank you, Ben, for being here. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Mona McCallie-Witters, who serves as the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Lynn County, NAMI. Dr. Mona brings passion and expertise and a 35-year career in mental health services as a licensed psychologist. She seeks to catalyze change, reduce stigma, advocate, and increase awareness about mental illness. She completed her graduate education at the University of Iowa. Dr. Mona lives in Cedar Rapids, her hometown, and is at the forefront of mental health initiatives in Lynn County and beyond. Thank you so much, Dr. Mona, for being with us. All right, well, thank you very much to our esteemed panel for being here. We will get started with our first question for Dr. Mona. Dr. Mona, NAMI is dedicated to improving the quality of life for people with mental illness and their families through support, education, and advocacy. What services are available, particularly in Lynn County?
Well, I'm honored to be here tonight and to speak to you all and to be a member of this panel. And I want to reiterate, I think Cedar Rapids is a great community and we've been through a lot over the past year. So we at NAMI Lynn County have stepped up and done more virtual events, and we're switching to more in-person events. So our nonprofit organization, we offer an array of free services. These services include a phone line referral, educational classes, community forums, and of course, our NAMI signature programs. These signature programs have the stamp of approval from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. It's kind of like your good housekeeping seal of approval. And they're led by peers who actually have lived experience and have been trained in the NAMI program. So for example, on June 7th, we will be hosting our NAMI Connections Recovery peer-led support group. It will be in the evening on the 1st and 3rd Mondays of the month. We also have our NAMI Family Support Group, which is for any adult who has a loved one that may have experience with mental health. Those are also twice a month. And we do many other programs like NAMI Ending the Silence, where we have speakers go in and talk to companies about how to stop the stigma, and classes such as the NAMI Family to Family class. The important thing is we're trying to amplify the message that recognition and awareness that mental well-being is an important part of who we are as an individual, as well as to our community. Together, we can stop the stigma and make it okay. Those are key central themes to what we're doing and how to have a healthy, better community with resilience and recovery from the pandemic. So one of our hashtags is no one is alone. And I heard Amara and others have mentioned that. So let's continue together with NAMI and the many other nonprofits to help us develop a strong community where no one feels alone in their mental health struggles.
Dr. Mona, what is the best way for someone to find these resources? Is it your website or on social?
There's two really wonderful ways, and I'd like to recognize the Lynn County supervisors and their webpage. It's lynncounty.org. And on that webpage, you'll find an abundance of mental health resources. During the pandemic, a variety of our local mental health experts, we met, and it was called Unified Command. And we put together toolkits that are available on this Lynn County webpage. You can also go to the NAMI-lynncounty.org webpage or NAMI.org, our national parent organization. That's the largest nationwide grassroots consumer-oriented mental health organization. So there are some really good resources in our community. We have wonderful mental health agencies. And I think sometimes it's the stigma that stops people from utilizing those services. And that's something that we've been working really hard on in Lynn County to break down the stigma and encourage people to use the resources that we do have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Supervisor Rogers, we have a brand new resource center here in Lynn County, the Mental Health Access Center. I understand this model is new to Iowa. Can you tell us a bit about it and what the partnership means for our community?
Yeah, Amara, I first want to I want to thank you so much for being out front and being really the first to be out front on this issue. It's noticed and deeply appreciated.
Thank you.
The Lynn County Mental Health Access Center was something that was sort of had been worked on for a number of years, but really came to fruition when Lynn County had some mental health dollars that had to be spent. And I worked with Foundation 2, Area Substance Abuse Council, the Abbey Center, and the Penn Center on creating Iowa, hopefully at the time, Iowa's first mental health access center. So as you said, this is not a new service nationally, but it is in Iowa. What access centers are 24/7, 365 services where people who are in crisis can go, whether they need less than 23 hours of service or if they need a couple of days to get out of their environment. What makes Lynn County's access center unique is that we also have a substance use component where people can go to to medically detox off of drugs and alcohol with nurses who supervise 24/7, or a sobering unit. The whole idea of a mental health access center is to answer the question that plagues emergency room doctors and law enforcement personnel when they interact with someone who's sick, but they don't need the hospital, and they certainly shouldn't be in jail. So it answers the question: if we can safely divert someone, where can we divert them to? And that's simply what the Access Center is, and it is a phenomenal tool in the toolbox that our community has in order to better treat people with mental illness and substance use disorder.
And is that adults only?
That's a great point. For right now, it is for individuals 18 and over, and I'm working with some community members on trying to either replicate this service for juveniles or look at some other best practices nationally, because obviously we hope that children become adults, but children are not exempt from mental illness, brain
Right.
health issues, and substance use disorders. And so really we got the adult center created and are now looking at best practices and other models to help juveniles and their families.
Thank you. Drew, Foundation 2 is another resource based in Cedar Rapids with significant influence around the state and beyond. What services do you all provide?
Well, thank you so much for having us here this evening to talk about such an important component of our community, and generally something that we feel always needs more awareness and always needs more kind of discussion and public awareness. Foundation 2 has been in the Cedar Rapids area since the 1970s and has been continuously accredited by the American Association on Suicidology since that time as well. We have a very old, cool house downtown Cedar Rapids that took some damage in the derecho, but that's where we operate our crisis center, which takes somewhere around 50,000 phone calls a year from all over. Most of those calls are within Iowa, and those come in through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the statewide crisis line, Your Life Iowa, as well as our own crisis line. And from the crisis center, which is really our hub of services, we also dispatch our mobile crisis teams, which are teams of counselors that are traveling really throughout Eastern Iowa, providing crisis intervention services 24/7. So those counselors are out at 2 in the morning, they're out at 7 in the morning, they're out in the middle of the day at schools. The other thing that I'm really proud of working at Foundation 2 is all of our services are free to the individuals utilizing them, and there's no requirements to use our services, our crisis services. In addition to our crisis teams and our crisis line, we also have counselors that we've now embedded with several law enforcement departments, the Cedar Rapids Police Department. We just started with the Lynn County Sheriff's Department, as well as the Marion Police Department. And those counselors are acting in a role to intervene in mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis and try to provide individuals access to the mental health care they need and divert away from unnecessarily criminal justice interactions, as well as unnecessary hospitalizations. We also have a youth services side that's been around for quite a while, and that is a youth shelter, literally a traditional youth shelter for kiddos that need a place to stay in emergencies. And then we also have our Fostering Futures program. It used to be called the Independent Living Program. And that's for kiddos that are transitioning out of the foster care system, to provide them with the resources they need to be successful as they move into the adult life.
And you mentioned that all of your services are free. Can you speak a bit about how you're funded then?
Well, we, like many not-for-profits, we braid funding, and we constantly chase funding. We are strong advocates that crisis services should be free to the consumer. When an individual is in crisis, they don't want to talk about what insurance they have or what the fees are. They need those services immediately. And we think that, crisis services pay for themselves through that diversionary practice by keeping the individual, and it's the right thing to do, getting to the client as early as possible and treating them in their environment is a pretty effective and, good way to work with individuals in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you. And your volunteer work includes Make It Okay, a statewide campaign to raise awareness about mental health and end the stigma around mental illness. What does this campaign provide?
Yeah, thank you, Amar. And again, first of all, thank you for convening this forum this evening and everything that you are doing and preparing to do in our community. And thanks also to everybody that's dialed in. As Amara said, Make It Okay is a statewide campaign. It's under the umbrella of the Iowa Healthiest State Initiative. And very simply, it's a community campaign to reduce stigma by raising awareness and starting conversations about mental illness and increasing understanding. Often when we are not sure of what to say, or we are afraid of saying the wrong thing, then we remain silent. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to do here. And so this movement, Make It Okay, is really based on a very simple model: learn, talk, share. There was an article in the New York Times earlier, a couple months ago, and it was in the general context of the pandemic and how we hesitate to grieve the small things. We have this tendency to say, well, oh, I can't complain. Somebody else is much worse off than I am. I'm probably luckier than others. And when I read that, it really made me think about the stigma around mental illness. Often there is sort of this narrative or this self-talk that, oh, I'm not so bad. We seem to live in this environment where it's just, we say, just get over it or suck it up. We say that to ourselves, and unfortunately we say that to others. So Make It Okay offers resources for individuals as well as for employers. That includes videos and articles. My personal favorite is a simple one-pager, tips on what you can say and what you really shouldn't say. So I encourage everyone to go to makeitoK.org/Iowa.
That's great. I think that's really important. People tiptoe around the issue because they don't know what words to use. So it sounds like that's a great resource. How did you get involved in the movement, Anne?
Yeah, so, again, learn, talk, share. I'm learning how to talk about this and how to share. In 2008, I was presented with a diagnosis of bipolar type 2. And bipolar is a brain disorder that causes shifts in moods, high moods and low moods. With bipolar 2, the high moods are characterized by hypomania, and the low moods are characterized by depression. And unfortunately, bipolar 2 can look a lot like depression. I understand sometimes it's misdiagnosed as depression. And the reason why I say unfortunately is because if bipolar 2 is treated with antidepressants exclusively, it can actually trigger mania or hypomania. And so in my case, for the first 10 years after that diagnosis, I hid. I hid the diagnosis in my personal life. I hid it in my professional life. Only the idea of being labeled crazy was really scary to me, and a source of shame and embarrassment. And in fact, work is really where I hid it the most. And ironically, it's work where I discovered just how much energy I had been wasting hiding that diagnosis and hiding what I was dealing with in my day-to-day life. Our company sponsored a program which really prompted me to reflect, how do I show up at home? How do I show up at work? And how do those two things intersect to help me be most effective in life? And so now a combination of medication and therapy and support from loved ones is really the key to my success, to thriving in life. And I had my first psychiatrist said, you'll always take medication. And maybe I shouldn't mock his voice, but that's kind of how I felt when he said that. And I don't know, maybe he's right, but I'm really grateful for the support system and for what I'm learning, and also just the encouragement, empowerment that comes from speaking up.
And so when did your courage, when can you talk about, like, how long did that take? Was there a trigger, something that triggered it?
There was actually, there's an organization, a women's organization in town that hosted a conference, and they featured an individual who is on one of the national networks, written a couple of books, one of which talked about her struggles with depression. And at my company at the time, we had an employee resource group, a women's employee resource group that was planning ahead on sort of a debrief of that conference. And I talked to one of the planners and I said, maybe this is a time for me to share a little bit about my story. And that was back in 2018, so three years ago this month. But I could still say I was today years old when I learned how to tell my story.
Sure. Thanks for sharing. That's great. Thank you, Anne. Supervisor Rogers, you also have been open about your personal experiences with mental illness. How has that informed your advocacy for mental health?
It really is the foundation of it. And it was the foundation of it before I truly knew that I had a diagnosed mental illness. And my journey was, it takes on average, I think, 3 different trials of medicines before doctors can really find the one that's well suited. Not all antidepressants work the same, and they can have some really adverse effects. My depression really, when I look back in the rearview mirror, I can see so many patterns of behavior that were negatively impacting my life. And I really didn't choose to become well until my first marriage was starting to dissolve. It just so happened that I got on the right medicine, not at the right time, uh, but it really changed the rest of my life. And it also really helped me better understand, like Anne said, medicine does so much, but it's the support systems and it's how you really open up to other people and understand that the battles that you're facing, many other people are facing. So I didn't feel as isolated. The other part of my depression that was sort of I wasn't taken care of was the fact that I was drinking a lot more, going through a divorce and really just trying to pick up the pieces. And it wasn't just for a little bit of time, it was for years. And I finally decided in September 15th of 2014 to become sober. And it's the greatest decision I've ever made. And it's truly opened my eyes to the 7.7 million Americans that have a co-occurring substance use and mental health disorder. And I decided on the 5th anniversary of my anniversary of sobriety to write a guest editorial. I wanted to be very transparent because this is such an impactful situation to be in, where you feel parts of shame and why can't I be like other people, and I don't want to be viewed as crazy. And I felt compelled to share that I'm an elected official, I'm a father, a husband, I'm a son. Those are the things that define me, not having a mental illness or a substance use disorder. And that really has been the foundation for why I advocate as hard as I can to reduce stigma, create new services, or really try and find gaps in services so that we can meet people where they're at.
I really appreciate you and Anne sharing your stories. Dr. Mona, I wonder if you could talk a bit about both Anne and Ben have talked about therapy. Can you talk about the role of therapy and how it works for people who may be suffering from mental illness?
Amara, I'm thrilled and excited to talk about therapy. The problem is we would be here all night. I could go on and on, so I'll try to cut to the chase. But I too am so appreciative for both Ben and Anne and many others who share their very powerful stories. It takes a lot of courage to be honest and open and so vulnerable in our community. So by doing that, you set a very powerful role model for other people and a precedence that, hey, it's okay. Let's say in the case of Ben Rogers, for a very successful male adult to say, I need help, and to go get those services. And someone like Ann Harris Carter, who's so active and involved in our community and in the corporate world. I mean, you must have both taken a pause at some point about, do I share and how much do I share? But now, I mean, your stories are so courageous and really tell the amount of energy and time that you spend covering up and hiding, maybe from yourself or from people that you love, truly your mental illness. And that's a very common thing that we see, that people spend a lot of energy denying and covering up. But at some point they reach an event, a precipitating event, where it just tips the scale, that the home remedies and the things they read on the internet aren't working and they need help. And they pick up the phone and they make that phone call. From that point, research has shown that people already, while they're waiting to get services before they've seen the therapist, doctor, or counselor, they're already starting to show improvements according to the research. So it's that mindset, that mental change that, hey, I can't do this alone and I need help. So psychotherapy is a research-driven treatment program. And there's lots of myths out there about it, but Its purpose is to address negative thinking, unhealthy patterns, and kind of this maladaptive coping strategy. So, as Ben referenced in Anne, it can be used concomitantly with medication or by itself, but we see sort of a synergistic effect when you're doing your changes in your lifestyle, diet, psychotherapy, and perhaps medication. You're really impacting the whole brain and the brain function, because we know that mental illness is a brain disorder. It's not a character flaw. It's not a symptom of that you're weak or you can't cope. It has to do with how your brain is functioning, much like someone that has a heart attack and their heart needs treatment, and they have a program with medications and diet and exercise. So I know that Anne and Ben have been working very hard on their mental health and their mental wellness. So I both appreciate their stories. There's lots of myths, and I'll just touch on some about therapy. Of course, one of the myths is psychoanalysis, and you have to have a couch and lay down and tell your story. No, absolutely not. It's a collaborative therapeutic alliance with a therapist. Another myth is that psychotherapy focuses on your past and it's a very passive process. No, it's an active engagement working towards mutually agreed goals. We also, another myth that I hear about is psychotherapy is only for persons with serious mental illness. Absolutely not. It can address a wide range of concerns, career issues, marital disputes, communication problems, and of course, it can help people understand if they have an ongoing mental illness. And the last myth, and this is something that Amara and I have talked about, is that psychotherapy is only for the wealthy, worried Caucasian females. Absolutely not. That's a harmful stereotype that prevents males and people of color and persons of all ages from getting the helpful treatment they need, whether it's therapy through their EAP programs at workplace or from their health insurance provider. All of these are essential to your mental health and to your mental well-being. Your family will benefit, and it could potentially be life-changing for you.
Yeah, I think there is this notion that it's very expensive, but it's great to learn in this on this call about the resources available in our community free of charge for people who need it. So I think this is a valuable conversation to have. Have you noticed, Dr. Mona, an uptick since COVID, or how has the pandemic impacted youth and young adults in terms of mental health and mental illness?
Well, I do a lot of work with college students, and they've been really struggling, and their grades have dropped, and they're not learning as well. And honestly, there's more substance abuse, missing out, falling behind on their assignments. And in fact, students are dropping out of college and their grades are falling. So we're also hearing things about suicide and an uptick in that regard. The previous research, and I'll have to defer to Drew because he's obviously on the cutting edge, but the numbers that I've heard are suicide is the second leading cause of death in people ages 10 to 24. I'm not sure if the pandemic has bumped that up, but I know that calls to the crisis lines, the NAMI helpline, Foundation 2, they are all up, and that we're seeing more young adults and high school students struggling. At our NAMI resource line, we are usually receive 1 or 2 calls a week about how do I help my children? How do I help my teenager? And that is something new that we didn't experience pre-pandemic. And I'm going to ask Drew if you could just step in and talk about some of the things that you're seeing at Foundation 2 with youth.
Yeah, it's well, I appreciate kind of this question overall. It's been an incredibly difficult year, or 16-month period now by this point. And then here in Eastern Iowa, we had the derecho kind of just to cap everything off, which was a traumatic event. and a tough event. Underneath the pandemic, we have one of the most painful financial crises possibly ever. And what that does to families, what that does to individuals, what that does to even there's some research coming out about what financial struggles do to youth. And then we have isolation on top of that, from adults to kids. Even my 6-year-old now, but she was 5 at the time. Her first year of school was ended early, and then she was doing these online classes things. But that isolation, it has been an incredibly difficult year. And within that, there's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknown that just plays on anxieties and fears, which can play on depression. So we have seen a lot of calls into our crisis line. Suicide rates nationally have been climbing for the last decade, both with adults and with children. So those under the age of 18. It's just a plethora of events. I'm glad there's increased awareness for it, both at the national, at the state, and at the local level. And as a society, we have a long way to go, but I'm proud of the work we're doing as a community, and as evidenced by this forum, and as the groups of people that we have in our community who are working on these really important issues.
Thank you so much. Drew, I have another question for you. One of the reasons I'm running for mayor is because I care deeply about the partnerships in our community, including recovery from the pandemic, as we're discussing, and building effective relationships with law enforcement and citizens. Would you tell us a bit about the program with Foundation 2, the law enforcement liaison program?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. That's a super exciting program to me. And I have to say, first off, that it wouldn't have been possible without the work of Sergeant Jeremy Paulson and Sergeant Chris Bieber at the Cedar Rapids Police Department. They approached us almost 4 years ago now. So I like to think that we were working on this before it was really on even the national radar. We had identified this as a direction we wanted to go. It took a really close collaboration between law enforcement and Foundation 2, because we haven't always worked together traditionally, the mental health field and the law enforcement field. So initially we pursued a federal grant for this, for the Bureau of Justice Administration, to pilot this project with CRPD. And essentially what it is, it's where we take one of our mobile crisis counselors and we embed them with law enforcement. So they can ride with officers, they can get called out by dispatch, but they are there as a partner working with law enforcement to as an asset, and both to the officers, but also to the community. And their role is to engage individuals with mental health needs or behavioral health needs. We recognizing that those individuals are frequently using law enforcement as first responders to mental health crises. And so this is a wonderful type of program, and the types of progressive programming that I hope we continue to see more and more of, just like the Access Center, I would put into that category of these kind of progressive programming that are absolutely assets to the community. So these counselors are riding along with officers, they're getting right up there with the officers. And in a lot of the cases, the officers are stepping back and letting these counselors engage these individuals and bridge them into the mental health services available in our community, instead of them ending up maybe in worst case scenario in jail, or escalating because the officers aren't sure how to de-escalate the situation, or ending up unnecessarily at a hospital. We are able, in the majority of the cases, over 80%, to stabilize them in the community and connect them with the community resource that is more effective in the long term. But again, I can't say enough about our partnership with law enforcement and how important that is, and how important that will continue to be.
So do you see that program expanding? What do you see as the future there?
I sure hope so, because I think it is programs like that are a piece of a puzzle in building a better system of both of mental health services, of crisis care, but also in looking at different ways of engaging our law enforcement partners to build kind of different models of law enforcement. Again, knowing that as a society, we've done a really good job advertising 911, and people have that number down, and it's not always the best service for individuals who are experiencing, certain crises, especially around mental health or substance use, and in some cases can be traumatic to them. And so this isn't a fix for that, but it is a piece of the puzzle. So I sure hope we continue to see it expand. I think it's a wonderful and an exciting type of programming.
And so how is that triggered? Is it if someone calls 911 and through the description, the operator knows? So how can you speak a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate it. Our goal was to make them as accessible as possible to the department. So there isn't one way they can be called out. A officer in the field can call them and say, I would like you to come out here. An officer working overnight can notify them to check in on somebody in the morning. Dispatch can call them directly, or an officer can say, hey, I'm going out to check on a family. Can you come with me? So really, there are multiple ways they can be accessed, and that was our goal. We wanted them to be available through a number of avenues, so law enforcement felt like they were there when they needed them. And that was when we did some feedback, when we did some kind of looking into different services and gaps in the past. That was something that came up a lot as officers said, we feel a lot of the times like we just don't have that really quick access to the support that we need to work with individuals.
Great, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
That's a great program. I mean, often we see that officers just aren't trained to deal with people with mental illnesses. So how incredible that your counselors are available to go out with them. That's great. If anyone has, Mona, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I also wanted to add on, you were talking about the police department and this training that they're getting, that NAMI Lynn County is actively involved in the crisis intervention training for the police officers at the academy, that our speakers come and share lived experiences to kind of, even early on in their training, before they get out into the community, are aware of and working on and understanding how mental illness can impact a person and how that person may interact and respond to the police officer. So I think it even begins early on in their training, and the things that Foundation 2 Liaisons does is so valuable. And it also fits well with our supervisor, Ben, who was talking about the Access Center, because they have so many pieces to kind of decriminalize mental illness and not take them to jail, but take them to other more appropriate treatment, i.e. the Access Center, or perhaps the emergency room, or even in, as Drew alluded to have this mobile crisis team out there, people to deal with the mental illness, not to criminalize their mental health.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Anything else to add from our panelists? Okay. I have a question for all of you. We're just scratching the surface today, so I want to give our panelists an opportunity to highlight other community partnerships that are making a difference before we get into questions from the audience. Anne, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I'm involved with Make It Okay, really as a community volunteer, and I, sort of the dots connect in lots of ways, and that can be very powerful. But when you layer stigma on top of that, it can be hard for people to know where to turn. One of the organizations that I'm involved in is through MedQuarter, and MedQuarter is that business district that's anchored by Mercy Medical Center and on one end, and Unity Point St. Luke's on the other end, and PCI in the middle, and then all of the businesses that are in those neighborhoods. And as being part of the Faith and Medicine Task Force, we're specifically tasked with, if you will, how to be a support to the churches and the faith communities that are in the MedQuarter, but also in the broader metropolitan area. And so as we work, we have partners from all of the entities that are represented today and others, but I guess we often and regularly ask ourselves, are we duplicating efforts, or what do we need to do to make sure that we're complementing what's available and not duplicating efforts, or what do we need to do so that there's really no wrong phone number or no wrong call, so the people who are already hesitating and, like me, maybe waited years even to make that first call, know that the resources are available in the community, and it really is okay to reach out for help.
Thank you for sharing that, Anne. Are there other community partnerships that any of you want to mention before we take other questions?
I'll just jump in real quick because we are really scratching the surface, and there's we're so lucky to live in a community that is service rich. I mean, people really do come here and have historically come to Cedar Rapids because we have had a plethora of service providers offering these critical services. I saw in the chat, Dr. Witters uplifted a really important topic about decriminalizing mental illness, and that really is important to get not only the Cedar Rapids Police Department, but the Marion Police Department and the Sheriff's Department having all of their sworn law officers trained in crisis intervention training. I know all of Lynn County Sheriffs have, I believe Cedar Rapids has, as well as Marion. It's really, and that's a culture shift that these officers are, how to talk to someone who may have a mental illness, how you approach them, how you interact, where are you going to take them? That has really, I think, has the potential to fundamentally change how mental health services are really provided, because law enforcement oftentimes, they're at the front lines. They are interacting with people in times of crisis. So having law officers who are not only trained in, but very well versed in crisis intervention training is critical, as well as trying at the county level and the regional mental health level, and certainly we need to at the state. We have a lack of psychiatrists, practicing psychiatrists. We have a lot who do research, but not clinical, or rather family practice, where someone who has a mental illness needs to see a psychiatrist. The waiting period can often be weeks, and Iowa is a very challenging state to recruit psychiatrists because of our low Medicaid reimbursement rates. So we're trying to figure out very collaborative, progressive ways to offer bonus incentives, some tuition reimbursement to get more psychiatrists here, as other psychiatrists are starting to begin to retire.
And what about the role of telemedicine in psychiatry?
That's a great question, Amara. I'm so happy that's on your mind. That's particularly with COVID, it's taken on greater importance, and certainly getting the funding available. Sometimes telehealth can be a lot more costly, but it's a tool in the toolbox to try and get access for people when they need it, or at least reduce the amount of wait time. I think it's just going to take on greater importance as, again, it's harder to recruit people to Iowa with our Medicaid rates. I don't know, kind of like pilots, there's just sort of not many people are becoming psychiatrists or pilots, and we're seeing workforce shortage. So having telehealth integrated in the jails, the hospitals, or other settings like the Access Center, where people can easily and effectively communicate with a psychiatrist, is pretty critical.
I have heard as well that it's really hard to find child psychiatrists. One of our close friends is a child psychiatrist, and he stays very, very busy because there just aren't a lot of people with that kind of specialization.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Drew.
I just wanted to mention really some of the work of NAMI and Dr. Witters, but the increasingly recognition of the importance of peer support in the work that we do. NAMI has done a wonderful job at that. It's been a slow process, but that is having those with lived experience involved in the development and actually operations of these services. And it's a place where I like to think, Lynn County is probably ahead of many other places in the state, and there's a long way to go, but that is a partnership that is invaluable in all regards, whether you have a family that is struggling or an individual that is struggling, having a peer there to walk with them, having a peer there to support them, to provide their own experiences is really valuable. And so that's something that I continue to be excited about.
Mhm. Thank you, Drew. We really appreciate both the telehealth therapy bills that are allowing it for another year. There was a lot of anxiety, I know, from my husband, a psychiatrist, and many other mental health providers, that the legislature was not going to pass the bill for parity, and we were afraid that this telehealth would go away. But my understanding is that Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance will be covering it for the next year and hopefully longer. It's absolutely an essential piece for people who live in the rural communities. And you know, without it, I can't imagine someone driving 2 hours to get to their appointment and 2 hours back home. So, you know, we need access. We need tools like that to reach out, whether it's to people in jail or people are farmers, you know, so that they don't feel alone and isolated and can get the quality services that we do have. Unfortunately, as Ben referenced, there are quite a few of shortages in psychiatry, but my understanding, and I'm hearing more rumors in the pipe mill, that they had a record number of people apply to psychiatry residencies. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to end up in Iowa, but we have to keep tooting our horn and telling people about the good quality of life that we do have here in our schools, our education, and in our community. But clearly, we have a lot more work to do, and in the area of mental health. Children, we at NAMI, we're lacking, and we're trying to get mental health advocates for children and children's programs. So if you have a passion and you want to volunteer, I'm sure Drew at Foundation 2 or NAMI or Make It Okay, we could all use your voice and your time and talent to help families deal with mental illness.
We do have a question in the chat. I did want to say, with respect to the crisis intervention training for law enforcement, you know, I think it's a good idea for that to be continuing education. You know, one training or an orientation really is not enough. I mean, this is something that should be ongoing throughout their careers. So in the chat, we have a question from a Hope Walk of Cedar Rapids standpoint. What resources and support do these organizations and facilities have for veterans, particularly on the eve of Memorial Day weekend, and LGBTQ after the latest Trevor Project statistics and report coming out with some fairly alarming statistics? What kind of support for these populations do we have here?
I can start. Foundation 2, our crisis line, we work both with the VA crisis hotline as well as some initiatives through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I also want to thank someone from the Hope Walk. The Hope Walk is an amazing local resource that we have that happens yearly. And if you've never been to the Hope Walk, it's what an experience to go down there and be with those individuals as they walk and remember their loved ones that they lost. Foundation 2 also frequently utilizes the Trevor Project. That's an amazing resource available to LGBTQ and individuals. Those are both really amazing resources that are out there. I'll say at the suicide prevention level, the American Association on Suicidology has increasingly focused on, or at least pretty significant portions of some of their work on the issue of veteran suicides, which is absolutely a tragedy and something that is still trying to be understood. But if a veteran was to call the NSPL hotline, it is a question we ask, and we can either route them through the VA hotline, and if they would prefer to not be routed through to that, they can of course stay on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, where we can connect them with resources that are specific to veterans.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything to add? No. Okay. So speaking of hope, when you think about mental health and Cedar Rapids, what is one hope you have for the future of our community, as we have 5 minutes left? oh, Supervisor Rogers.
Yeah, that's a really phenomenal question. And my hope is that people come to this issue, whether they have it, know somebody with it, or don't, that they come to it with a lot more compassion and understanding that this is, as Dr. Witter said, this is about brain chemistry. That was the most profound thing that my mother told me in my journey was, this is a chemical imbalance of the brain. It's no one wakes up wanting this. It's just how we're made. So coming at it, I think, with a sense of compassion can oftentimes be the difference of life and death, or of a much higher quality of life. So that would be my hope.
Thank you for sharing that. Anne?
Thank you. Yeah, I keep talking about normalize the conversation. Because when it's easier to talk about, it's easier to solve issues. I mean, that applies to so much that we face in life. I've had the privilege of working for companies that had employee assistance programs, or EAPs. And so I kind of got in the habit in recent years of saying, what if we came in on a Monday, and how often do you ask somebody how the weekend was? Oh, I went running, I sprained my ankle, I ended up in the ER, and now I've got this cast, and blah, 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 blah. What about, I woke up on Saturday, I was feeling down, I was feeling depressed, wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I called EAP, was able to get another perspective, and I'm really glad to be back at work today. And so that's what I want for our community. Normalize the conversation, make it easier to talk about, because then we get rid of the demeaning labels. We make it so that people aren't afraid to speak up, and then it's easier to seek support, and it's also easier to offer support. That would be my hope for Cedar Rapids and beyond.
Thanks for sharing that, Anne. Drew?
I second Anne. So just gonna take the easy route here. I really hope that in our community, but across the United States, that screening for mental health care becomes just something that we do as a standard. It's just like when you go to your doctor and you step on the scale and they check your blood pressure. My hope is that questions around depression or suicide or anxiety or whatever it might be just become a standard part of that. And I think that will help the stigma come down to some degree. And I think that's an important part of just checking up on one another.
Thank you. And Dr. Mona?
Wow, those were all fantastic. I think open your heart, open your eyes, and really support each other from a very honest frame of reference, to advocate for mental health, education, awareness, and training, and starting it early on in the schools, so that people grow up in this destigmatized culture, that we have stigma-free zones at work and home and in our schools. It's so important from the early on with the bullying and stereotyping and harmful things that people say. So we need your time and we need your talent in Cedar Rapids. So please join with us, volunteer, and help us make our community a better community for all.
Well, I love this. This has been a really great conversation. You all are doing such amazing work for our community. We will definitely share this recording, but also the resources that have been mentioned. We will get the word out as much as we can and share this on our campaign page and on our socials. Because I think it's immensely important for our community. I really appreciate you all spending this hour with us. Rarely do we end like right on time, so I'm proud of that. But I just am so grateful to have all of you doing the work that you're doing in our community and making our community better and safer. You're just kudos to you all. So thank you again. Again, Amara4CR, our hashtag Amara4CR, that's our social handle. We'll post all of this later tonight. So thanks again for being here. Thank you for being a part of this and for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
You have a great night.